कार्तिकेय शर्मा जी, नेटवर्क की पूरी टीम।
Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. President Trump has threatened to sue the Wall Street Journal, News Corp, and Rupert Murdoch over a report claiming he wrote a sexually suggestive letter to Jeffrey Epstein in 2003. According to media reports, Trump denounced the story as fake and defamatory on his Truth Social amid growing scrutiny of his past ties to the late sex offender. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has been diagnosed with a common vein condition causing leg swelling and hand bruising from frequent handshaking. The White House confirmed on Thursday his doctor assured there are no signs of serious health issues. Brazilian President Lula da Silva has slammed US President Donald Trump's plan to impose a 50% tariff on Brazilian imports starting in August, calling it unacceptable blackmail and vowing not to take orders from any foreigner. The escalating trade spat follows Trump's claims of unfair practices and treatment of ex-President Bolsonaro. Katie Miller, a former Trump administration official and loyalist, has reportedly distanced herself from Elon Musk amid rumors of a falling out. According to media reports, this comes as political tensions mount over Trump's proposed NASA budget cuts, which Democrats say would be illegal to implement without congressional approval. Nearly 600 people have been killed in sectarian clashes in Syria's Suwaida province, prompting government troops to withdraw from the Druze heartland, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and the AFP. The violence, which displaced nearly 2,000 families, drew Israeli airstrikes and US-led mediation. Torrential rains have pounded South Korea for a third straight day, forcing over 5,000 people into shelters and killing at least 4, according to the local safety ministry, as President Lee Jae-myung urges stronger disaster prevention efforts. Satellite imagery from IC reveals that North Korea has completed a new maritime pier at its Sohae satellite launching station, enabling transport of larger rocket components than previously possible. This development could allow North Korea to test longer-range missiles, according to media reports. Rice prices in Japan has surged by 99.2% in June compared to last year, according to official data released on Friday, deepening economic pressures on Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. The sharp increase in staple food costs has intensified public frustration, while the inflation rose by 3.3% in June. The United States said it does not support recent Israeli airstrikes in Syria, signaling clear displeasure over the escalating tensions. This comes as Israeli jets struck government targets in Damascus and southern Syria, demanding a full withdrawal of Syrian forces from Druze-populated areas. Syrian interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa has accused Israel of attempting to fracture the country's unity, while vowing to protect the Druze minority. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said Washington remains committed to fostering calm and continued discussion on integration in Syria. Let's listen into what Tammy Bruce, the U.S. State Department spokesperson, had to say.
We are actively engaging all constituencies in Syria to navigate toward calm and continued discussions on integration and a stable, more prosperous future for Syrians, and that continues. That has been the mission.
Now we're joined by Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe. He's Kotalawala Defense University, joining us live from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. What does this U.S.'s condemnation of Israeli airstrikes in Syria signal about changing dynamics in Washington and Tel Aviv relations?
Well, actually, I think more than a changing dynamic, we need to understand the US strategy towards Syria since the collapse of the Assad's regime in December. US has taken rather strategically oriented, a grounded policy towards Damascus, even though the interim president, Ahmad al-Shara, has a jihadi past, who seems to be an Islamic militant. Still, Trump has taken quite a realist approach towards Syria as how Americans behaved with the Afghan Mujahideen when Mujahideen was, when they were supported by the Americans in the peak of the Cold War. But this strategy has been undermined by the recent escalation espoused by the Israel. But we must understand, I don't think so, as you pointed out, there would be changing dynamics between Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. On the contrary, what we can see is the fact that there is a considerable Druze population living in Israel. So Israelis cannot completely ignore the demands, whatever the grievances coming from the Druze. The Israeli IDF has a considerable Druze fighters, and most of the Druze are Israeli citizens. At the same time, if you look at Syria, there is an overwhelming minority, approximately 1 million Druze living in certain provinces of Syria who are being subjected to harassment after this interim government came into power. So there is this instability that propels Israel to take the military measures, especially if you just listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu and the IDF the spokesperson stated recently. So Israelis have clearly stated that as long as Ahmad al-Shara's government is not doing anything to safeguard its Druze minorities, Israel will continue its airstrikes in Syria until the Druze get secured. So this seems to be a kind of, the upsetting scenario for what Donald Trump proposed and what Donald Trump plans from Syria, because Trump, on the contrary, wants to have a strategic vision towards the Middle East by making kind of a very much aligned pro-Western government in Damascus. But then again, I have my own doubts about that, because if Trump has read the political history of perhaps from Central Asia or maybe from the Middle East, he would definitely understand that whatever the puppet government that the pro-Western government that the Western countries are trying to initiate in the Middle East will eventually boomerang upon them. So we have classic examples from places like Afghanistan and Iraq.
And Dr. Pinsara, do you think that it is realistically possible for the U.S. to intervene and make peace in Syria?
Well, I think from a practical perspective, U.S. seems to be the only partner who has larger capacity, larger stances in terms of restoring the governing structure of Syria, because United States has already lifted its sanctions in Syria from June, and the U.S. State Department has made a statement affirming the Washington's continuous support towards Syria, so which is quite a good move. But at the same time, we need to understand, Benjamin Netanyahu is supposed to meet Donald Trump in the coming weeks. So there can be certain shifts from the Washington side if latter can persuade Israeli leader to be more lenient towards the Syrian conflict, because at the same time we can't forget that Israel has been occupied, it has been involved in military escalations in multi-fronts. So they were attacking Iran and they were having a hard time with Hamas. At the same time, they consistently attacked Lebanon, and now they have opened another military front in Syria.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic. Now we move on to our next news. The United Nations has sounded the alarm over spiraling violence in Syria, warning of a deepening humanitarian crisis. Briefing an emergency session of the Security Council, UN Assistant Secretary General Khalid Khiari described a grim situation marked by mass displacement, widespread casualties, and civilian infrastructure on the brink of collapse. Hospitals are reportedly at or near capacity, with power and water outages compounding this crisis. Let's listen into both Khiari and Dorothy Shia, the U.S. representative to the UN on the sectarian clashes.
There were further alarming reports of civilian religious figures and detainees being subjected to extrajudicial executions and humiliating and degrading treatment, footage of desecration and mutilation of corpses, as well as incidents of sectarian incitement and looting of private property, was widely circulated on social and conventional media, causing further trauma and fueling intercommunal tensions and violence.
To that end, we are calling on the Syrian government to lead on determining the path forward. We have seen deeply troubling reports of atrocities committed against Syrian civilians. The government must investigate all reports of abuse and hold the perpetrators accountable. While the United States did not support recent Israeli strikes, we are engaging diplomatically with Israel and Syria at the highest levels, both to address the present crisis and reach a lasting agreement between two sovereign states.
Turning to Israeli airstrikes, Syria accused Israel of violating Syria's sovereignty and urged both nations to uphold the 1974 disengagement agreement to prevent a broader escalation. Syria's UN envoy Qusay al-Dakhak condemned the Israeli strikes, rejecting what he called fabricated justifications and calling the attacks part of a larger campaign to destabilize the country. This is what Qusay further stated.
وترفض سوريا رفضاً قاطعاً الذرائع التي تسوقها السلطات الإسرائيلية لمحاولة تبرير أفعالها العدوانية، وتؤكد أن هذه الممارسات ليست سوى امتداد لسياسات الاحتلال الممنهجة الرامية إلى تقويض استقرار سوريا وجرها إلى ساحة الصراع، إذ شهدت الأشهر الماضية كما تعلمون جميعاً انتهاكات متكررة من قبل إسرائيل لاتفاق فض الاشتباك لعام 1974.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Pansara Hamara Singh. Dr. Pansara, thank you for staying with us. With Syria's humanitarian infrastructure seem to be collapsing, is the international community doing enough to prevent a total disaster, according to you?
Yeah, I think, it is very much aligned with the question that you asked previously. Now, here we have a situation in which United States wants to maintain quite a strategic agility protocol towards Syrian conflict, because Washington wants to see a very much pro-Western government in Damascus. But at the same time, we can see Israel remains quite ambivalent, and there is a pro-jihadi leader has been elected as the interim president of Syria, which Israel finding to be a great threat for the very existence of the Jewish state. At the same time, we must understand, when you look at this situation from a bigger picture, from a nuanced picture, the Israel is worried about the Druze population. So when you look at the rationale behind Israeli strikes over the certain provinces in Syria, and also last Wednesday they bombed Israeli defense ministry in Damascus, and even the certain buildings near the presidential palace was devastated in Damascus, which the Damascus citizen did not even undergo during the civil war. So this seems to be an escalating scenario. So when you ask that whether the international community is capable of preventing this escalation further, my answer is quite simple. As you know, Israel has lesser stances and lesser standing towards the international norms, or even public international law. It has simply opted for a strategic move based on its defense expectations. So I don't find that there would be any repercussion, or there would be a severe pressure from international community which will be able to control and undermine Israeli attacks in Syria, unless there would be a very strong consensus between Washington and Jerusalem. That is likely to stop the escalation in Syria, in my point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Pansara, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay in this discussion topic. The Syrian presidency has accused Druze fighters in Sweden of breaching the ceasefire, which led to the withdrawal of government forces from the southern province on Thursday. In a statement, the presidency labeled the Druze factions as outlaw forces, accusing them of committing horrific violence against civilians. These actions were described as a direct threat to civil peace, pushing Syria closer to chaos and security collapse. The government also condemned Israeli interference in Syria's internal affairs, warning it exacerbates regional instability. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe. Thank you, Doctor, for staying with us. Are the Druze fighters in Sweden defending their community, or is there any undermining of national stability as claimed by the Syrian presidency?
Precisely so, because firstly we need to understand the historical presence of the Druze in Middle East. As I pointed out in my analysis at the very beginning, there is a considerable Druze population, approximately 1 million Druze are living in Syria. And during Assad's regime, whatever said and done, Assad was a strong secularist. Assad never advocated for Islamist propaganda in committing atrocities targeting the ethnic minorities. So the Druze had nothing to fear. But the Druze very existence has come to the stake when the interim government came into power after the collapse of Assad's regime. So there is a considerable fear, the threat perception emanating from the Druze, especially the Druze leaders are having a hard time with the Bedouins in certain provinces of Syria. So if you clearly listen to the statement made by al-Shara, interim president of Syria, you might have realized that it is highly, it leads to an unstable situation within the country as long as Druze are continuing to fight with the Bedouins, because it might lead to a civil war. At the same time, now we can see an intervention coming from Israeli in support of the Druze, because, as I told you quite earlier, the Israeli has a considerable Druze population which compels them to protect the Druze population in the neighboring countries such as in Syria. So this is a situation which we are seeing at the moment.
We appreciate your insight, Dr. Pansar. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic. Israeli strikes have killed 4 people in southern Lebanon, according to the Lebanese health ministry. Tel Aviv says the attacks targeted 2 Hezbollah operatives. An Israeli drone struck a car in Nebatiyeh, killing 1 and injuring 2. Another strike hit a truck in Nakura. These attacks come despite a ceasefire deal between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah. Tensions remain high along the border, with Lebanese officials condemning the continued violence. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe. He's joining us live from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Doctor, can Israel justify its cross-border strikes under the guise of targeting Hezbollah operatives, given the rising civilian casualties as well?
Well, when it comes to civilian casualties, Israel has earned the notoriety. But in terms of the situation, and also from international legal point of view, the anticipatory self-defense always allows a country to strike first. But having said that, we need to look at the geopolitical picture in Lebanon. As you precisely stated, Lebanon, the Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Hezbollah, and the government of Israel came to a deal last November. And according to that deal, Israel armed forces were supposed to leave Lebanon territory. But despite having said that, they have been still based their position in Lebanon strategically in 4 different places, right? It is in this context we need to understand the situation. Now, you might ask why Israel justifies its strikes. So simple answer is the fact that Israel has a strategic approach to eliminate all the potential Hezbollah leaders. Now, when you look at the fact that Hezbollah has already been debilitated after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, who was assassinated by Israel last year. After Nasrallah's death, Hezbollah has come to a point of no return, but still, it's the troop facilities and its grounding operations remain considerably alarming to Israel. So that is why IDF continues to hunt down all the remaining Hezbollah key operatives. So this is the justification that Israel can always pose in terms of, attacking the Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe, for joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Bahrain's Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa visited the Pentagon today to reinforce the U.S.-Bahrain defense partnership. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, expressed gratitude for Bahrain's support, especially in hosting the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet since 1995. Hegseth also highlighted Bahrain's role in Operation Midnight Hammer, a 2025 U.S. strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. The two sides discussed defense cooperation with Salman. He also reaffirmed Bahrain's commitment to peace and regional stability, citing the 2020 Abraham Accords. Let's listen to the interaction between Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary of the USA, and Bahrain's Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa.
You can always count on Bahrain, and as evidenced by recent events, but also you know the courage you've shown for a long time. Original signer to the Abraham Accords, host of the Combined Maritime Forces. You are committed to peace through strength, just like we are in that region. And I think we are at a moment of reckoning and a moment of opportunity because of a lot of the stances that you've been willing to take, our partners have been willing to take. We're thankful for that. So we're eager to review how we can enhance self-defense capabilities, how we can work side to side in our collective ability to take advantage of these opportunities right now. So plenty to work on, plenty to talk about, but all built on a foundation of strong cooperation for quite some time. And
we will continue to deepen this relationship, and we are so proud of this strong cooperation, and I am all ears to hear how we can best help. And we will also be explaining some of our defense requirements and how we can work together to fill those needs.
Now we move on to our next news. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the Justice Department to produce more documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. Following growing pressure from supporters, Attorney General Pam Bondi says she'll move to unseal grand jury transcript. Meanwhile, Trump threatens to sue Wall Street Journal over a report of a 2003 birthday letter to Epstein, which allegedly included a risky drawing and Trump's name as a signature. Trump denounced it as fake, calling it fake and defamatory. Elon Musk also weighed in on X, suggesting Epstein's death was a hoax. Tensions over the case continue to escalate. This comes as White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said Trump will not recommend a special prosecutor for the Epstein case. She added that Trump has been transparent and believes the media is overhyping this issue. Let's now take a look at what Karoline Leavitt, the White House Press Secretary, had to say.
Well, the idea was floated from someone in the media to the president. The president would not recommend a special prosecutor in the Epstein case. That's how he feels. And as for his discussions with the Attorney General, I'm not sure. The president has been transparent. He has followed through on his promises to the American people. But he doesn't like to see Democrats and the mainstream media covering this like it's the biggest story that the American people care about.
Now we're joined by our guest for this discussion, Scott Faulkner. He's the head of Eagle Enterprises security firm, joining us live from Washington. Thank you, Scott, for joining us today. Good to see you.
Pleasure.
Is President Trump's call to unseal Epstein-related documents, is it a move towards transparency, do you think, or this is a political strategy of him to control the narrative?
I think it's a little bit of both. At some point, everything will come out, whether it's going to come out in the next year or 20 years from now in a history book. The key is that the Epstein scandal really is at the epicenter of how the deep state works in Washington, D.C. And so it's for those of us who have always had a healthy skepticism for the intelligence communities and their ultimate agendas for just acquiring power and holding on to it. Epstein is really at the epicenter of that. So a lot of us are eager to see it come out sooner rather than later, but at some point it may be later.
And Scott, should Trump's alleged 2003 connection to Jeffrey Epstein be viewed as relevant today to current investigation, or is it just a distraction?
It's a total distraction. I mean, people know that Trump early on, he and Epstein were friends. He was in the Epstein plane. Epstein attended political and social events with Trump in New York and in Florida. And then when the first case came out against Epstein, dealing with child trafficking, he completely distanced himself from Epstein, basically ghosted him immediately after the conviction or the plea bargain. And so all these photos, all of these things talking about Trump with Epstein, all predate that plea bargain. And from then on, Epstein was persona non grata with Trump and his entire business enterprise.
And Scott, now with figures like Elon Musk also fueling this conspiracy theories by reacting online, what responsibility do public figures like this have in shaping the discourse around this Epstein case, according to you?
Well, first and foremost, as I just mentioned, Trump has nothing to do with the current issue with dealing with Epstein. If there was anything, not just a smoking gun, but just any illusion that Trump had anything to do with Epstein past his plea bargain, it would have been plastered all over the place during the 2024 election, because the CIA, the Justice Department, the FBI under Biden, they all were doing everything they could to undermine Trump and his movement. So the fact that they didn't do anything with this means that he is completely clean on that. The key is now is, what really is going on. It's ironic that about every decade or so we have a huge sex scandal in Washington or in Hollywood. In 1984 we had the Mayflower Madam, and then in 94 we had the Hollywood Madam, and now we have Maxwell and Epstein. And in each case, their client list was never seen. In the case of both the Mayflower and Hollywood Madams, of course, these were adults dealing with adults. The perversion of the Epstein is these are children and young teens dealing with very perverted adults. So it has a much more dire component to it, because you're dealing with not just human trafficking, but child trafficking. And it's ironic that Maxwell, in her plea bargain, sealed her files. And so once again, she's convicted or pled guilty to sex trafficking, human trafficking, child trafficking. But then who did she traffic to? That's the ironic part of it. And if all this was a hoax, why did she get convicted in the first place? Why did Epstein get jailed in the first place? So there's a lot of pieces that still don't add up. And so it's not just conspiracy, it just doesn't add up.
Thank you very much, Scott, for joining us today and sharing your insight as head of Eagle Enterprises. Now we move on to our next news. In a major development, the United States has officially designated the Resistance Front, or TRF, as a foreign terrorist organization and a specially designed global terrorist. The terror group, a proxy of Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, had claimed responsibility for the April 22nd Pahalgam massacre that killed 26 civilians. The U.S. State Department said the designation reflects the Trump administration's continued resolve to counter terrorism and bring justice to the victims of the Pahalgam attack. The move adds TRF and its allies to Lashkar-e-Taiba's existing terror designations under U.S. law. India welcomed the decision, calling it a timely and important step. In a statement, the government thanked Secretary of State Marco Rubio and reaffirmed its commitment to zero tolerance towards terrorism. Now we're joined by retired Major General Sanjay Meston. He's a defense and geopolitical expert joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Major General, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Given TRF's links to Lashkar-e-Taiba and its role in Pahalgam massacre, what kind of military or intelligence cooperation do you foresee between India and the U.S. going forward?
Asuma, good morning. This is a step in the right direction by the United States. With the United States, luckily I had been there in 2007 along with the Indian Army Chief, and we had meetings then. So what I would like to highlight that we have an excellent setup of joint intelligence cooperation, counterintelligence, and all these have been well laid out and tabulated. But the fact of the matter is that now the TRF has been designated as a global terrorist, as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States. It augurs well between the relationship between the two countries, and it's a good diplomatic win for India. Unlike the recent SCO meet, where you are aware that the resolution was not passed, and our Foreign Minister, Mr. Jai Shankar, had pressed on that the basic mandate of the SCO was, against extremism, terrorism, and separatism, but somehow, it was not tabled on. So the United States doing is a good message for Pakistan, a strong message for Pakistan that they shall not indulge in any kind of terrorist activity on the Indian soil and against the Indian people. And unfortunately, the mastermind obviously was the Pakistan Army, top leadership and the ISI. And they used LET, which is their known terrorist outfit. And of course, TRF is their proxy or offshoot of the LET, which was raised in 2019. So it augurs well for India, and I think it's a strict warning for Pakistan that they should not indulge in any terrorist activity in India. And I think the relationship between United States and India again is on the upward swing on all fronts, I would say. Especially even on trade, we are going to resolve it shortly. But on the military front, we are having an excellent defense cooperation. And I think intelligence sharing and counter-terrorism, these are things which have already been sorted out. And these things have taken place much better after 9/11 attacks in United States.
And Major General, how do such designations influence ground-level counter-insurgency tactics in conflict zones such as Kashmir, where proxy warfare is often difficult to trace?
Yeah, it's a very good question asked. See, Asuma, I was also posted in Afghanistan as the Indian Defense Attaché way back in 2011 and 14. And I recollect the United States and, of course, the International Security Assistance Force. Many of these terrorist organizations had been, labeled as global terrorists, especially by the UN Security Council. But on ground, nevertheless, they continue to function. So what kind of impact they will have? I think on the terrorist outfits, it may not have much of an impact. They will continue to do operations, but on the top leadership, and especially when I say leadership, here I refer to Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir and the DG ISI. See, because they control everything. You are well aware that even when the Pahalgam attack took place, way back on 16th April, the Army Chief, Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir had given a lecture, and in which he stated very clearly that Hindus and Muslims are separate people, separate country, and they cannot coexist together. They are separate nations, and also Kashmir is a jugular vein. So this was, the start point. See, the operation was well planned, well executed, and it was well thought of a long time back. But I think this lecture, this speech of his on 16th April also set the ball rolling. So this itself shows that the perpetrators are the top leadership of the Pakistan Armed Forces and the ISI. And therefore, perhaps it's a warning to them that if they resort to such future actions, then I think President Trump, knowing his personality, then he may be constrained to impose sanctions or maybe to stop selling military hardware equipment to Pakistan. That's the only kind of thing I see on ground. Otherwise, on ground, not much difference perhaps will be there on these terrorist networks. As it is, you are aware, recently LET and Jaish-e-Mohammed had
Major General Sanjay, we are short in time. Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your insight. That was Major General Sanjay Meston. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.